What we are looking at here is a depiction of the development.
See, a lot of people don't realize that the foundation of the anti-abortion movement has nothing to do with children. It doesn't have anything to do with some kind of morality about making sure we don't harm babies. No. The fact is that there were white folks, most of whom were Christian, who lost the fight to keep segregation in America. And they got on a phone call. There are tapes to prove this. They got on a phone call and they said, how can we increase our political power to, they might not have used these exact words, but make America great again. They said, if we choose this thing that they just codified at the Supreme Court, Roe versus Wade, if we choose this abortion issue, then we can add white Catholics to our number. And we can actually shield our cause to not sound like we're these evil segregationists, but rather that we are the moral majority and that we just want to live as Christ would live, even though, of course, they see Christ as a white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired American. They get together and they said, Roe is going to be our fight, our leading cause. But behind all of that, there are all of these other causes that we want to get accomplished.
During the Reagan administration, they had something called a tolerance of apartheid. He was supporting subversive CIA-based programs in Africa to take the oil and the minerals out of Africa. One such case was Angola, where the Reagan administration was sending guns, ammo, landmines. Even today, Angola has the highest amputee rate of people without limbs than any nation in the world. But then I took these children to the Congress of the United States because I wanted Americans to see this is your foreign policy. You're killing African people. You're maiming African people. In my view, Ronald Reagan was a war criminal.
Reagan had appointed Clarence Thomas to the recognizing his conservatism to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which was a commission that dealt with handling employment discrimination cases and affirmative action. And Thomas had demonstrated, for the most part, that he was part of this new generation of Black conservatives.
Because Clarence Thomas was once over the EEOC in California. Nobody ain't never heard of Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas has a son named Jamal. This man used to be on a whole other side and completely changed his whole getup.
Clarence Thomas literally reinvented himself. I would argue he changed his beliefs to become someone else, and he was ultimately rewarded for that. The danger of Clarence Thomas. And Black Republicans from the 1970s also gave the warning call for Clarence Thomas, saying, wait a minute, this is a guy who's shaming his own sister, paraphrasing his sister as a welfare queen. Didn't use those words exactly, but that was a term that was famous under Ronald Reagan. And he's getting tons of money from conservative organizations. I think with Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan is around during the Nixon era. Ronald Reagan, what we more so have, the shift is, one, it is the rise of 24-hour cable news, the rise of right-wing media. And we see the grift getting even more dangerous because it's no longer about Black capitalism. It's no longer even a veil or a veneer of community. It is about individualism, rugged individualism. And that is where you have the watershed moment of Clarence Thomas.
I was diagnosed with HIV in '87. I was infected in '83. It was a very difficult time, but that the stigma around HIV still, it frightened me.
AIDS is flourishing here against the backdrop of vast poverty and crime.
By 1986, African Americans were the majority of the cases. The press was still showing images of white gay men. And so Black people didn't see themselves in these cases of AIDS. Jackson was the first presidential candidate with an AIDS policy. He was the first presidential candidate that even spoke about AIDS. I'll never forget in '88, he said in his Democratic speech, we should never surrender. even with AIDS, you deserve compassion. So black people didn't see themselves. And we had family members that were dying from this illness, but they were the drug addicts and the gay men, again, on the fringe of society, people that, we've been trying to, Aunt Claire been stealing our silverware for the sale for drugs for years, so now she met the maker. And there was kind of a dismissiveness also within the African American community about the black family members that were dying in our community. Because remember, they were gay men, black gay men, and they were drug users. The people we hide and hope don't come to Thanksgiving dinner. I was a young operative at the peak of my career, working in the Jackson campaign and living with HIV in secret. We had learned from our mistakes in '84. So '88, we were a fine-tuned machine. In '88, the enthusiasm was beyond anything I had ever seen. And people came out and they voted for him. Jesse Jackson received 91% of the African American vote in 1988. And so it was exciting for Black America to have a black man to speak of our issues. What he showed in '88 was that people could come together around common needs and issues.
He did reasonably well, but it was still not time for an African-American candidate to get the Democratic nomination.
President Joe Biden, how are you?
He had tried to run for president a couple of times. He never really electrified anybody. He never really turned people on, to use that term. He just didn't have that kind of appeal. He was a hard worker. He was good on personal politics. He probably talked too much publicly, and he had a habit of saying things that were not terribly, but it would be something that came back to haunt him.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
The Willie Horton ad is birth of a nation in a new era. Because if you go back and you watch one of those original silent films, Birth of a Nation, there is a big black male brute there to terrorize the white woman. She is there to symbolize the purity and the sanctity and the centrality of the white race.
They're using the same playbook over and over and over again.
Fear is an attention getter. Anything to keep a story going. Terrorists, the Hispanics, gays, communists.
So when Lee Atwater needs to resurrect that kind of sensibility, to resurrect that feeling in white people that they are under threat and therefore they need to become a part of the conservative movement to protect themselves.
There's a story about a fella named Willie Horton.
Willie Horton?
Convicted murderer.
Convicted murderer, Willie Horton.
Willie Horton. Weekend vacations.
Weekend passes.
Cold-blooded. Convicted murderer.
First degree.
Convicted murderer.
Killer. Murderer.
They rape people.
Raped his wife.
They maul people.
Willie Horton will become a household name.
No more furloughs for people that rape, pillage, and plunder. Thank you and God bless.
You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites.
He's gonna pull on that same imagery with a man named Willie Horton. And he's gonna put out a political ad that said, here is the big black male brute that because of all of these liberal policies got out of jail and terrorized a pure, innocent white person. And if that's the America you want, keep on voting for Democrats. But if you want to take your America back, vote for us. Canvass for us. Donate to us. Run for office with us. Make sure that we take over every single legislative body across the country, from your state legislatures to Congress. Make sure that we take over the courts.
And it was not the truth. It was not what exactly had happened, but it did turn the tide against Dukakis, and George Bush won the presidency.
This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago by drug enforcement agents in a park just across the street from the White House.
And meanwhile, they lined the whole thing up, right? And used black people as being the scapegoat for crack.
You know, during that time, the image that was plastered on TV were young black men and saying, this is the image of crime in America. This is the image of violence in America.
Of course I hate these people. And let's all hate these people, because maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done.